Welcome to Epic Yarn. Dive into a world of imagination and adventure with our captivating fiction stories. From enchanting fairy tales to thrilling mysteries, each episode is crafted to transport you to a different realm. Whether you're a fan of fantasy, sci-fi, or classic folklore, there's something here for everyone. Join us on this storytelling journey and let your imagination run wild.
Chapter 1, The Mundane Before the Mayhem. The late afternoon sun, usually a golden wash over the Dallas skyline, felt oddly muted. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that hummed with the predictable rhythm of a bustling city. Patrick, a man whose 6 feet 2 inches frame and masculine build were softened by the faint lines of perpetual worry around his sharp blue eyes, navigated the pedestrian traffic near the Arts District. His short, curly hair was still damp from a quick shower after his shift, and his clean-shaven jawline was set in a familiar expression of quiet focus. He wasn't in uniform, but the disciplined posture of a police officer was ingrained in him, even in a worn t-shirt and jeans. Beside him, his 7-year-old son, Kyle, was a whirlwind of energy and facts. "Dad, did you know the largest tornado ever recorded was in Oklahoma? It was like 2.6 miles wide. Imagine that, a whole city block just gone." Kyle gestured wildly with a half-eaten granola bar, his bright eyes wide with the wonder of destructive weather. Patrick managed a small, tired smile. "I'd rather not imagine that, buddy. Let's stick to imagining those giant ice cream sundaes we're about to get." He steered Kyle gently around a group of tourists admiring the Nasher Sculpture Center. Since his wife, Sarah, had passed 3 years ago, every moment with Kyle felt precious, a fragile bubble he fiercely protected from the world's sharp edges. The thought of any gone city blocks, even hypothetical ones, sent a familiar chill down his spine. They were heading towards a small, independent ice cream parlor a few blocks away, a place Kyle had discovered on one of his urban exploration missions with Patrick. The air, usually thick with the exhaust of city buses and the distant murmur of traffic, had begun to feel heavy, almost humid. A strange, almost metallic scent hung in the air. Patrick's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. NWS alert, severe thunderstorm warning issued for Dallas County. He frowned slightly. Thunderstorms were common, but the tone of the alert felt a little more urgent than usual. Around them, other people were starting to check their phones, a collective ripple of concern spreading through the crowd. A few hurried glances went up to the sky, which was indeed darkening, a bruised purple-gray creeping in from the west. "Dad, look!" Kyle pointed excitedly, not at the sky, but at a detailed map of Texas he'd pulled up on his tablet. "See? Dallas is right here, in the southern part of Tornado Alley. It's like a target." Patrick chuckled, ruffling Kyle's hair. "Let's hope not, kiddo. We're just getting ice cream." But a second buzz from his phone made him pause. This time, the alert was more insistent, accompanied by a low, distant rumble that wasn't thunder. "Tornado watch issued. Seek shelter." The casual chatter around them died down. Faces turned upward, a shared apprehension replacing the afternoon's easygoing mood. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze, suddenly picked up, whipping stray papers down the street. Patrick felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a storm. This felt different. He looked down at Kyle, whose bright eyes were now fixed on the ominous sky, no longer just a map, but a tangible, growing threat. Chapter 2, The Sky Tears Open. The distant rumble intensified, no longer just a sound but a vibration that resonated through the very pavement beneath Patrick's feet. The air pressure dropped noticeably, a sudden, unsettling lightness that made his ears pop. The purple-gray sky over downtown Dallas wasn't just darkening now, it was swirling, churning with an unnatural speed. A new, more terrifying alert blared from his phone, cutting through the rising murmur of panicked voices. "Tornado warning. Seek immediate shelter." "This is not a drill." "Dad, what's happening?" Kyle's voice was small, edged with a fear that mirrored Patrick's own. His geography facts had vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed apprehension of a 7-year-old facing something truly immense. "We need to go, now." Patrick grabbed Kyle's hand, his grip tight. The ice cream parlor was directly ahead, its glass front suddenly looking terrifyingly fragile. He scanned frantically for a more substantial building, a basement, anything. People were scattering, some running blindly, others frozen in disbelief. The wind shrieked, no longer a breeze but a violent gust that tore at their clothes and sent trash cans tumbling. Then, the sound hit. It wasn't thunder, it was a deep, guttural roar, like 1,000 freight trains bearing down on them, growing louder, more monstrous with every second. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. Debris, small at first, leaves, then paper, then larger scraps, began to whip through the air. Patrick spotted a sturdy, older building across the street, a bank with thick, stone walls and a recessed entrance. "This way, Kyle. Run." He pulled his son, shielding him as best he could from the stinging wind and flying grit. The streetlights flickered, then died, plunging the immediate area into a premature twilight. Sirens wailed, then were abruptly swallowed by the escalating roar. Just as they reached the bank's heavy, ornate doors, a massive gust slammed into them, throwing Patrick off balance. A sharp crack echoed overhead as a piece of cornice broke away from a nearby building, plummeting towards the sidewalk. Patrick reacted instinctively, shoving Kyle hard into the bank's alcove, covering him with his own body. The sound of shattering glass from across the street was deafening. Through the chaos, a flash of movement caught Patrick's eye. A figure, tall and broad-shouldered, was running against the flow of the panicked crowd, moving with a purposeful urgency. He wore a heavy, protective jacket, and even through the swirling dust and debris, Patrick registered the glint of a helmet and the determined set of a sharp jawline. It was a first responder, a firefighter, already in the thick of it. "Eddie." He was shouting something, pointing, trying to direct people towards a more secure structure, his voice barely audible over the growing scream of the wind. The air was thick with flying debris now, small objects becoming projectiles, then larger, more dangerous fragments. The roar was all-consuming, a physical force that pressed down on them, vibrating through their bones. The ground seemed to shake. Patrick squeezed his eyes shut, pressing Kyle closer, praying for it to end. The downtown core of Dallas was no longer a city, it was a war zone, and they were trapped in its terrifying heart. Chapter 3, Trapped Together. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and fury. The roar wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical entity, pressing down on Patrick, vibrating through his very bones. The bank's alcove, though offering some shelter, became a funnel for the wind, a vortex of stinging grit and debris. He could hear the sickening thump of larger objects hitting the stone walls, the high-pitched shriek of metal tearing, and the constant, terrifying cacophony of shattering glass. Kyle was a small, trembling weight beneath him, his face buried against Patrick's chest, muffled sobs shaking his small frame. Patrick squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make himself bigger, a human shield against the unimaginable force. Time stretched, endless and terrifying, a blur of noise and pressure. Then, as abruptly as it began, the roar began to recede, fading into a receding howl. The pressure eased. An eerie, ringing silence descended, broken only by the distant wail of alarms, the drip of water, and the groans of stressed metal. Patrick slowly, cautiously, lifted his head. The scene that met his eyes was apocalyptic. The street, moments ago a vibrant artery of downtown Dallas, was now a wasteland. Skyscrapers, once gleaming towers of glass and steel, looked like jagged teeth against the bruised sky, their windows blown out, their facades stripped bare. Twisted metal, splintered wood, and unidentifiable debris lay strewn everywhere, forming impassable mountains of wreckage. The ice cream parlor, where they had been heading, was a skeletal ruin, its colorful sign ripped away, its glass front utterly gone. "Kyle? You okay, buddy?" Patrick's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He gently shifted, helping his son sit up. Kyle's face was streaked with tears and dirt, but his eyes, wide with shock, scanned the devastation. My map," Kyle mumbled, pointing a shaky finger at a crumpled, mud-stained piece of paper that had once been his cherished geography printout, now half buried under a shard of glass. "We'll get you a new map, kiddo," Patrick promised, pulling him into a tight hug. He looked up, trying to orient himself, his police training kicking in despite the raw terror. "Anyone here? Is everyone okay?" A deep, calm voice cut through the silence. Patrick turned. It was the firefighter, Eddie, who had been trying to direct people earlier. He emerged from deeper within the bank's entrance, his heavy jacket smudged with dust, his helmet slightly askew. His gray eyes, though sharp and assessing, held a flicker of the same shock Patrick felt. He moved with a practiced efficiency, already scanning the immediate area, his gaze falling on Patrick and Kyle. We're okay," Patrick managed, his voice still rough. "Just shaken. My son, Kyle." Eddie knelt down, his large frame surprisingly gentle as he looked at Kyle. "Hey there, little man. That was quite a show, huh? You're a brave one." He offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Eddie. Dallas Fire Rescue. Patrick. And this is Kyle." Patrick felt a strange sense of relief at Eddie's presence, a professional calm in the face of utter chaos. Eddie's gaze swept over them, checking for visible injuries, then moved to the bank's interior, clearly assessing its stability. "The main vault should be secure," Eddie murmured, more to himself than to them. "But the rest of this place, it's a mess. We need to get clear of any unstable structures. Are you hurt? Either of you?" Patrick shook his head. "Just a few scrapes. Kyle's okay." Eddie nodded, his jawline set. "Good. We're cut off. Power's out, communications are probably down. We'll need to move carefully. Stick together. We'll find a safer spot, and then we wait for the cavalry." He looked out at the obliterated cityscape, a grim determination settling on his face. The downtown core of Dallas was a monument to nature's fury, and they were three small figures, survivors in its terrifying heart. Chapter 4, Survival Instincts. The grim determination on Eddie's face was contagious, a stark contrast to the apocalyptic landscape outside. Patrick, still reeling from the sheer force of the tornado, found himself taking a deep, steadying breath, his own police training beginning to reassert itself. The immediate terror was subsiding, replaced by the cold, hard logic of survival. "Okay," Patrick said, his voice stronger now. "Where do we go? Everything looks gone." He gestured vaguely at the chaos. Eddie, already scanning, pointed towards what remained of a large, older office building a few blocks away. Its lower floors seemed relatively intact, though higher up, it was a skeleton of twisted girders. "That building, the old mercantile. It's got a deep basement, reinforced concrete. It's our best bet for a temporary staging area, away from these unstable structures." He moved with a quiet authority, his eyes constantly assessing, his firefighter instincts honed by years of responding to disasters. "Can we get there?" Patrick asked, eyeing the treacherous path ahead. The street was a labyrinth of downed power lines, shattered glass, and unidentifiable chunks of debris. A faint smell of gas hung in the air. Carefully, Eddie replied, already stepping out of the bank's alcove, his boots crunching on broken glass. "Stay close. Kyle, stick right behind me, okay? Hold on to my jacket if you need to." Kyle, still pale but remarkably quiet, nodded, his small hand instinctively reaching for the sturdy fabric of Eddie's jacket. Patrick watched the interaction, a strange sense of relief washing over him. Eddie hadn't hesitated, hadn't questioned, just moved to protect. It was a comfort he hadn't realized he craved. Their journey through the devastated downtown was slow, agonizing. Every step was a calculation. They had to climb over collapsed walls, duck under precariously dangling wires, and navigate around gaping holes where the street had simply vanished. Patrick, with his police eye, spotted potential hazards, pointing out unstable piles of rubble or the glint of broken pipes. Eddie, meanwhile, used his broader knowledge of structural integrity and urban navigation, often testing debris with his foot before allowing them to proceed. At one point, they came across a car, flipped on its side, its alarm still blaring weakly. A faint moan came from inside. Eddie didn't hesitate. "Stay here, both of you. Don't move." He moved towards the vehicle, shouting, "Dallas Fire Rescue. Anyone in there?" Patrick watched, his heart in his throat, as Eddie carefully assessed the damage, his movements precise and efficient. He managed to pry open a bent door, revealing a dazed, elderly woman. With practiced ease, Eddie helped her out, calming her with gentle words, checking her for injuries before guiding her to a safer spot behind a relatively intact concrete barrier. Patrick felt a surge of admiration. Eddie wasn't just strong, he was genuinely compassionate. As Eddie returned, wiping sweat from his brow, he caught Patrick's gaze. "She'll be okay. Just shaken up. We need to keep moving before more people start wandering out." Kyle, who had been watching the rescue with wide eyes, piped up, "Mr. Eddie, is that like a rescue mission? Like in the movies?" Eddie grinned, a flash of warmth in his gray eyes that momentarily softened the grim lines of his jaw. "Something like that, kiddo. Only a lot more dust and a lot less popcorn." Patrick felt a small, involuntary smile tug at his lips. Kyle's innocent question, and Eddie's easy response, had cut through the tension, if only for a moment. They were still in the heart of a disaster zone, but with Eddie leading the way, and Kyle a constant reminder of what they were fighting for, Patrick felt a fragile thread of hope begin to weave itself through the wreckage. They were cut off, isolated, but they weren't alone. Chapter 5, Through the Rubble. The journey to the old mercantile building was a grueling testament to the tornado's indiscriminate wrath. Every block was a new obstacle course. Twisted street signs lay like discarded ribbons, cars were stacked at impossible angles, and the very air shimmered with fine dust and the acrid scent of ruptured gas lines. Patrick, ever vigilant, kept an eye on Kyle, who, despite his earlier bravery, was starting to lag, his small legs tiring from clambering over the debris. Eddie, however, moved with an almost preternatural calm. His large hands, scarred and calloused, were surprisingly gentle as he guided Kyle over a particularly treacherous pile of concrete. "Almost there, buddy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to cut through the oppressive silence of the ruined city. "Just a little further." They navigated what used to be a bustling intersection, now a gaping maw of torn asphalt and exposed pipes. Patrick spotted a glint of something metallic in the rubble. "Hold up," he said, pointing. "Looks like a ruptured water main. Watch your step." His police training, usually focused on human threats, now adapted to the raw, unpredictable dangers of a natural disaster. Eddie nodded, already assessing the flow. "Good eye, Patrick. We'll have to go around." He led them on a detour through what had once been a small park, now a skeletal remains of trees, their branches stripped bare, resembling gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. As they picked their way through the shattered landscape, a low, desperate cry reached them from behind a collapsed wall. Patrick's hand instinctively went to his hip, forgetting for a moment he wasn't armed. Eddie, however, was already moving, his pace quickening. "Stay here," he instructed Patrick, his voice firm. Patrick, despite the order, followed, pulling Kyle behind a relatively stable concrete planter. He watched as Eddie carefully approached the sound. A young woman, covered in dust and with a nasty gash on her forehead, was trapped by a fallen beam, her leg pinned. She was sobbing, her eyes wide with terror. Hey, Eddie said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm a firefighter. We're going to get you out. What's your name?" Patrick, observing from a distance, was struck by Eddie's compassion. It wasn't just professional duty, it was a deep, innate empathy. Eddie spoke to her gently, assessing the beam, looking for leverage. Patrick, without a word, moved to help, trying to find a stable point to push. Together, with a grunt of effort, they managed to shift the heavy beam just enough for the woman to pull her leg free. She collapsed, trembling, and Eddie helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much." "Just glad you're okay," Eddie replied, his focus already shifting back to the path ahead. Can you walk? We're heading to the mercantile building's basement. It should be safer. The woman nodded weakly, and they continued, now a group of 4. The shared act of rescue, the brief, intense collaboration, had forged a new, unspoken understanding between Patrick and Eddie. Patrick saw the raw courage and kindness in the firefighter, and Eddie, in turn, had witnessed Patrick's quick thinking and quiet strength. As they finally approached the mercantile building, its imposing structure a welcome sight amidst the ruins, the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows. The sky, though no longer churning, was still a bruised canvas, a stark reminder of the violence it had unleashed. They had survived, for now. And in the heart of the devastation, a fragile thread of connection, born of shared peril, was beginning to weave itself between the police officer and the firefighter, a silent promise of reliance in a world turned upside down. Chapter 6, A Glimmer of Hope and Connection. The mercantile building loomed before them, a towering, albeit scarred, sentinel in the twilight. Its lower floors, constructed with the robust architecture of an earlier era, had largely withstood the tornado's direct assault, though many windows were blown out like vacant eyes. Eddie led them to a service entrance, the heavy metal door twisted but still functional enough to pry open. Inside, it was dark, dusty, and smelled faintly of damp concrete and stagnant air. Basement should be down here, Eddie announced, pulling out a small, tactical flashlight from a pocket in his jacket. Its beam cut a narrow path through the gloom, revealing a debris-strewn corridor. Stay tight. Watch for anything sharp. They descended a wide, concrete staircase, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step. The rescued woman, whose name they learned was Maria, leaned heavily on Eddie, her leg throbbing. Kyle, meanwhile, seemed to draw strength from Eddie's steady presence, his initial fatigue replaced by a quiet curiosity. The basement was vast, a labyrinth of old storage rooms and maintenance tunnels. Eddie's flashlight finally illuminated a large, open space, clearly a former records archive, with sturdy, reinforced concrete walls and a low ceiling. It was dusty, but mercifully dry, and relatively free of major debris. "This'll do for now," Eddie said, his voice echoing slightly. He swept the beam around, checking for any immediate dangers, then pointed to a relatively clean corner. "Let's set up here. Maria, let's get that leg elevated." As Eddie attended to Maria, Patrick found a few discarded cardboard boxes and flattened them for Kyle to sit on. Kyle, ever the observer, looked around. "It's like a secret hideout, Dad," he whispered, a hint of his usual wit returning. "Like a mole's burrow, but bigger." Patrick smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. "Something like that, buddy." He glanced at Eddie, who was carefully bandaging Maria's gash with a ripped piece of his own shirt, his movements precise and gentle. The sight of the burly firefighter tending to the injured woman with such care stirred something in Patrick, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Once Maria was settled, and Kyle had explored the immediate vicinity, a heavy silence fell, punctuated only by their breathing and the distant, almost imperceptible sounds of the damaged city. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving them all bone-weary. "So," Patrick began, breaking the quiet, "Dallas fire rescue. You were already out there when it hit?" Eddie nodded, leaning back against the cool concrete wall. "Patrol. Heard the alerts escalating. We were trying to get people into the designated shelters, but it came on fast." He ran a hand through his short, masculine hair, dislodging a puff of dust. "You?" "Just picking Kyle up from a friend's," Patrick replied, his gaze drifting to his son, who was now drawing an imaginary map in the dust on the floor. "He's my world. Lost his mom a few years back." The words came out easily, surprisingly so. He hadn't shared that with a near stranger in a long time. Eddie's gray eyes softened with understanding. "I'm sorry, Patrick. That's rough. Especially with a kid." He paused, then added, "You're a good dad. You kept him safe." Patrick felt a blush creep up his neck. "Just doing what any parent would do." He shifted uncomfortably, but the compliment, coming from Eddie, felt strangely comforting. You're good at this. The rescue stuff." Eddie shrugged, a modest gesture for such a large man. It's the job. You too. Saw you out there. You were quick. Kyle, overhearing, piped up, yeah. Dad's a police officer. He knows all about bad guys and stuff. Eddie chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. A police officer, huh? So, we've got the law and the fire department, and a future cartographer. We're quite the team. He winked at Kyle, who beamed. As the hours crawled by, waiting for any sign of organized rescue, they fell into a rhythm of quiet conversation. They talked about the storm, the surreal destruction, and then, slowly, about themselves. Patrick found himself sharing more than he intended, drawn in by Eddie's calm presence and genuine interest. He spoke about Sarah, about the quiet ache of loss, about the challenges of raising Kyle alone. Eddie listened, offering quiet empathy, and in turn, shared stories from his own life, tales of camaraderie and hardship on the force, but also glimpses of a life lived with purpose and a deep sense of responsibility. The flickering beam of Eddie's flashlight cast long, dancing shadows on the concrete walls, making the vast basement feel oddly intimate. Patrick found himself studying Eddie's profile, the sharp jawline, the strong set of his shoulders, the way his gray eyes crinkled when he smiled at Kyle. A warmth, unfamiliar and unsettling, began to spread through Patrick's chest, a spark of connection he hadn't dared to feel since Sarah. It was a dangerous, exhilarating feeling, blossoming in the heart of a ruined city, in the quiet aftermath of a storm that had torn everything apart. Chapter 7, The Scars of the Storm. Hours bled into an eternity in the mercantile basement. The quiet conversations eventually dwindled, replaced by the heavy silence of exhaustion. Kyle, curled on his cardboard boxes, had finally drifted into a fitful sleep, occasionally whimpering in his dreams. Maria, her leg elevated, lay still, lost in her own thoughts of the devastation. Patrick and Eddie sat in companionable silence, the beam of the flashlight growing steadily weaker, a dim beacon in the encroaching darkness. Then, a new sound, faint at first, then growing louder, cut through the stillness. It wasn't the shriek of the wind or the groan of collapsing buildings. It was the distinct, rhythmic thud of a helicopter overhead, followed by the distant, unmistakable wail of sirens. Hope, a fragile, almost forgotten emotion, surged through Patrick. Eddie pushed himself up, his movements stiff. "Sounds like they're getting through," he murmured, his voice laced with relief. He pulled out a whistle from his pocket and blew a sharp, piercing blast, then another, hoping the sound would carry up the stairwell. Minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed down the concrete stairs, followed by the blinding sweep of powerful floodlights. Dallas Fire Rescue. "Anyone down here?" a voice boomed. "We're here," Eddie shouted, stepping forward, his tactical flashlight now barely aglow. 3 civilians, 1 injured leg. No other major injuries. The next hour was a blur of activity. Paramedics and other firefighters swarmed the basement, their faces grim but efficient. Maria was quickly assessed and carefully moved onto a stretcher. Kyle, roused by the commotion, clung to Patrick, his eyes wide at the sight of so many uniformed figures. "Dad, are we going home?" he whispered, his voice shaky. "Soon, buddy. We're safe now," Patrick promised, pulling him close. As they were guided up the stairs and out into the cool night air, the scale of the devastation was even more starkly apparent under the harsh glare of emergency lights. The downtown skyline was a jagged ruin against the moonless sky. Rescue workers moved like ants over mountains of rubble, their flashlights dancing. At the triage area set up a few blocks away, a makeshift field hospital, they were quickly processed. Maria was taken for further medical attention. Patrick and Kyle were directed to an area for uninjured survivors, where they were given blankets and water. Patrick looked around for Eddie, his gaze sweeping through the controlled chaos. He finally spotted him, talking to a superior officer, his helmet now off, revealing his short, curly hair dusted with concrete. He looked exhausted, but his posture was still that of a man ready for anything. Their eyes met across the crowded space. Eddie offered a small, tired smile, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. Patrick felt a pang, a surprising sense of loss at the thought of them going their separate ways. The intimacy forged in the dark basement, the unspoken trust, felt too significant to simply dissolve into the night. Eddie broke away from his conversation and walked towards them. "You two okay? Need anything?" "We're good," Patrick said, pulling the blanket tighter around Kyle. "Just processing." "Thank you, Eddie. For everything." "Seriously?" Eddie nodded, his gray eyes holding Patrick's. "Just doing my job." "You too, Patrick. You kept your boy safe." He paused, then hesitated. "Look, I know things are crazy right now, but once things settle, I'd like to check in. Make sure you two are really okay." Patrick's heart gave a strange lurch. It wasn't just a professional courtesy, he heard the genuine concern, the desire for continued connection, in Eddie's voice. "I'd like that," Patrick replied, perhaps a little too quickly. "Here." He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, realizing it was dead. "My numbers, it's probably easier if I get yours." Eddie pulled out a small, waterproof notebook and a pen, quickly scribbling down his number and a temporary contact for his station. "Call me. Anytime. Seriously." He handed the slip of paper to Patrick, their fingers brushing for a brief, electric moment. "I will," Patrick promised, clutching the paper. Kyle, sensing the shift in atmosphere, looked up at Eddie. "Are you going to come visit us, Mr. Eddie?" Eddie smiled, a wider, warmer smile this time. "If your dad says it's okay, kiddo. You guys were good partners." He clapped Patrick lightly on the shoulder, a firm, reassuring touch, then turned to rejoin his unit, disappearing into the swirling lights and sounds of the rescue operation. Patrick watched him go, a small, crinkled piece of paper in his hand, a fragile thread connecting him to the man who had, in the eye of the storm, become more than just a first responder. Chapter 8, The Weight of Normalcy. The days that followed the tornado blurred into a disorienting haze of news reports, emergency shelters, and the overwhelming scent of dust and damp. Patrick and Kyle, like thousands of others, were displaced. Their apartment building, while not directly hit, had sustained significant damage, rendering it uninhabitable for the foreseeable future. They ended up in a temporary housing unit provided by the city, a small, sterile space that felt a million miles away from the familiar comfort of home. Patrick found himself caught in a relentless cycle of practicalities, filing insurance claims, navigating aid agencies, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Kyle. The immediate terror of the storm had faded, replaced by a deep-seated exhaustion and a simmering anxiety. He'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he could still hear the roar of the wind, or the distant wail of sirens. Kyle, too, struggled. He was quieter, often staring out the window with a faraway look, and his usual boundless energy for geography facts was replaced by a subdued fascination with the news coverage of the devastated downtown. Amidst this new, unsettling routine, the crinkled slip of paper with Eddie's number became a tangible link to the chaos they had survived. Patrick stared at it often, his thumb tracing the hastily scrawled digits. He wanted to call, to hear a familiar voice, but something held him back. The intimacy forged in the basement felt almost too raw, too intense for the mundane reality of phone calls and check-ins. It was a connection born of life or death stakes, and he wasn't sure how it translated to the everyday. And then there was the deeper, more unsettling truth, the way Eddie had looked at him, the surprising warmth in his touch, had stirred something in Patrick that he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Sarah. The thought of opening his heart again, especially to a man, was terrifying. It was Eddie who made the first move. A week after the storm, Patrick's new, borrowed phone buzzed. A text, "Hey, Patrick. Eddie. Just checking in. How are you and Kyle holding up?" Patrick stared at the screen for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the reply button. He typed a quick, formal response, "We're okay. Thanks for checking. It's a lot." Eddie's reply was almost immediate, "I can imagine. If you need anything, even just a break, let me know. I'm off duty tomorrow." The offer, simple and genuine, chipped away at Patrick's defenses. He found himself texting back, accepting the offer of a coffee. Their first meeting outside the disaster zone was awkward, yet comforting. They met at a coffee shop in a part of Dallas untouched by the tornado, a place that felt strangely normal. Eddie, in civilian clothes, looked less like a hero and more like a regular guy, though his masculine build and sharp jawline were still striking. They talked about the recovery efforts, the sheer scale of the damage, and the exhaustion of their respective jobs. Eddie listened patiently as Patrick recounted Kyle's quiet struggles and his own sleepless nights. He didn't offer platitudes, just a steady, empathetic presence. "You know," Eddie said, stirring his coffee, "Kyle really took to you. He kept asking about Mr. Eddie at the station." Patrick felt a warmth spread through him. "He liked you too. You were good with him." Their check-ins became more frequent. Casual texts turned into phone calls, then short, impromptu visits. Eddie didn't push, didn't pry. He just showed up, sometimes with a small toy for Kyle or a takeout meal for Patrick when he knew he'd been working late. He'd sit and listen, or simply be present while Patrick struggled through the bureaucracy of disaster relief. He offered practical help, too, once, helping Patrick secure a temporary storage unit for the few salvageable items from his apartment, his strength and efficiency a quiet comfort. Patrick found himself looking forward to Eddie's calls, to his visits. Eddie was a steady anchor in the swirling uncertainty of their lives. He made Kyle laugh, and seeing his son smile, truly smile, was a balm to Patrick's weary soul. But the deeper, unspoken feelings remained, a quiet hum beneath the surface. Patrick knew he was falling, slowly, tentatively, for this man who had appeared in the most terrifying moment of his life. But the weight of his past, the ghost of Sarah, and the sheer vulnerability of opening himself up again, especially to a man, felt like another storm brewing on the horizon. Chapter 9, Beyond Survival. Weeks bled into months, and the temporary housing unit began to feel less like a stopgap and more like a new, unsettling reality. Yet, within this new normal, Eddie became an increasingly central figure. He wasn't just checking in anymore, he was a consistent, reliable presence. He'd drop by after his shifts, sometimes just to sit with Patrick while Kyle did his homework, or to help Patrick sort through the endless paperwork of insurance claims. He brought over meals, shared stories from the station, and, most importantly, he listened. He listened to Patrick's anxieties about the future, to Kyle's quiet processing of the trauma, and to the unspoken grief that still clung to Patrick like a shroud. Kyle, in particular, thrived under Eddie's attention. Eddie had a knack for connecting with him, patiently explaining the mechanics of a fire truck, or engaging him in long, animated discussions about different geographic regions. He even brought Kyle a new, laminated map of the world, and they spent an afternoon together, tracing routes and imagining adventures. Kyle started calling him Uncle Eddie, a title that sent a jolt through Patrick every time he heard it, a complex mix of warmth and trepidation. The unspoken feelings between Patrick and Eddie, however, grew more potent with each shared moment. It was in the quiet glances across the small living room, the lingering touch when Eddie handed him a cup of coffee, the way their shoulders brushed when they stood side by side, looking at a damaged building downtown. Patrick found himself anticipating Eddie's visits with a desperate eagerness, a feeling that both thrilled and terrified him. He hadn't allowed himself to feel this way since Sarah, and the idea of opening his heart again, especially to a man, felt like stepping off a cliff. One evening, after Kyle had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from a day of playing at a friend's house, Patrick and Eddie sat on the cramped sofa, the only light coming from a single lamp. The conversation had drifted from the city's slow recovery to the personal toll the storm had taken. Sometimes, Patrick confessed, his voice barely a whisper, I still hear it. The roar. And I freeze. I think about what could have happened to Kyle. To us. He ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion evident. Eddie reached out, his large hand gently covering Patrick's. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through Patrick's arm. I know, Eddie said, his voice soft, his gray eyes full of understanding. It sticks with you. You did good, Patrick. You kept him safe. Patrick looked at their joined hands, then up into Eddie's eyes. the air crackled with unspoken words. The raw vulnerability of the moment, coupled with the lingering trauma of the storm, stripped away all pretense. "It's not just that," Patrick admitted, his voice cracking. "It's sincera. I thought I was done. Done with everything. But then you." He trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of what he felt. Eddie squeezed his hand gently. "Patrick," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble, I felt it too. In that basement. Something shifted. And seeing you with Kyle, how you are, it's something special." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not going to pretend to know what you've been through. But I want to be here. If you'll let me." The honesty in Eddie's voice was a dam breaking. Tears pricked at Patrick's eyes, a mix of grief, relief, and a burgeoning hope. He had been so afraid to feel, so afraid to move on, to betray Sarah's memory. But looking at Eddie, at the genuine care in his eyes, he realized that moving forward wasn't a betrayal, it was an act of survival, a testament to life's persistent ability to find beauty even in the ruins. "Eddie," Patrick whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, and Eddie met him halfway. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with a deepening certainty, a kiss born of shared trauma, quiet understanding, and the fragile, powerful promise of a new beginning. In the aftermath of the storm, in the quiet heart of their temporary home. Chapter 10, Rebuilding and Renewal. Months turned into a year, then two. The scars on downtown Dallas remained, visible in the still empty lots, the boarded-up windows, and the occasional skeletal remains of a building awaiting demolition. But alongside the scars, there was a vibrant, tenacious spirit of rebuilding. New construction cranes dotted the skyline, glass facades slowly replaced shattered ones, and the familiar hum of city life, though altered, began to return. This slow, deliberate process of renewal mirrored Patrick and Eddie's own journey. Their love, born in the terrifying intimacy of shared survival, had grown from a fragile seed into something strong and resilient. The initial, tentative kiss in the cramped temporary housing unit had opened a door Patrick thought was permanently sealed. There were still moments of hesitation, echoes of grief for Sarah that would surface unexpectedly, but Eddie was always there, a steady, understanding presence who never pushed, only supported. They found a new apartment, not far from downtown, but in a neighborhood that felt like a fresh start. It was brighter, airier, and they filled it with new memories. Eddie, with his easy laughter and quiet strength, seamlessly integrated into their lives. He cooked with Patrick, helped Kyle with his homework, especially the geography parts, and became a regular fixture at Kyle's soccer games, cheering louder than anyone. Kyle, now 9, was thriving. The initial trauma of the tornado had faded, replaced by a quiet resilience. He still loved maps, but now he drew them with a sense of adventure, not just facts. He adored Eddie, the Uncle Eddie moniker naturally evolving into just Eddie. He saw the happiness Eddie brought to his dad, and that was all that mattered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Patrick and Eddie stood together at Clyde Warren Park, a place that had been mere blocks from where the tornado had first struck. The park, once a scene of chaos, was now bustling with families, laughter, and the scent of food trucks. Children chased pigeons, and the sound of distant traffic was a comforting backdrop. "Hard to believe," Patrick murmured, looking up at the still-recovering skyline. "Everything that happened." Eddie wrapped an arm around Patrick's waist, pulling him closer. "It was hell," he agreed, his voice low. "But it brought me to you. And to Kyle." He squeezed Patrick gently. Patrick leaned into the embrace, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He looked at Eddie, at the familiar kindness in his gray eyes, the sharp jawline that he now found so comforting. "I never thought, after Sarah." "I know," Eddie interrupted softly, his thumb tracing a pattern on Patrick's hip. "And you don't have to forget her, Patrick. She's part of your story. But you get to have a new chapter too. With us." Just then, Kyle ran up to them, a wide grin on his face, holding a crumpled leaf. "Dad! Eddie! Look!" This leaf traveled all the way from the botanical gardens. It's like a tiny explorer. Patrick and Eddie exchanged a warm smile, a silent understanding passing between them. Patrick knelt down, ruffling Kyle's hair. It certainly is, buddy. Just like us. He looked from Kyle to Eddie, then back to the city, still scarred but undeniably beautiful in its resilience. The tornado had ripped through their lives, leaving destruction in its wake. But in its eye, they had found each other, and from the rubble, they were building something new, something stronger, together.